tonight we have a special guest, Inquirer.com's Mike Sielski. We're going to talk to Mike about Joel Embiid. We're going to talk Flyers. We're going to talk Eagles. We're going to talk Mike's book. And we're going to talk Jake Voracek. Remember, he was looking for you on line 2 last week.
Yeah, Mike's good buddy. We're going to cover as much as we possibly can with Mike Sielski, as we always do, Bill. And it looks like he is here and ready to go, so let's get it going.
All right, Mike, welcome back as always. Glad to have you with us.
Well, hang on. There he is.
There he is.
Good to be with you guys. Thanks for having me. Always enjoy it.
All right.
Yeah. All right, Mike. As we do, when you do join us, we're going to try to cover as much as we humanly can, and the entire Philly sports scene, and yes, your book about Kobe Bryant, who we just lost 1 year ago yesterday. Let's get it going with some little Eagles talk first of all, though. Mike, what is your take on the Doug Peterson firing and the hiring of the guy who recently worked under Frank Reich, Nick Sirianni?
Well, I think you can trace the history of Jeffrey Lurie's ownership of the Eagles through the quarterbacks that the team has had at that time. And for better or for worse. So you start out and you have Ray Rhodes as the head coach, and his quarterbacks are Bobby Hoying and Ty Detmer and Rodney Peete, and Ray Rhodes lasts 4 years. And Andy Reid becomes the head coach, and right out of the chute, they draft Donovan McNabb. And for 10 years, everything is copacetic. It's awesome. And then they trade Donovan McNabb, and Andy lasts 3 years before he gets fired. And they go through Michael Vick and Kevin Kolb, and you start to see Nick Foles. Then they hire Chip Kelly. He lasts less than 3 years. And his quarterbacks are Mark Sanchez and Nick Foles and Michael Vick and Sam Bradford. Not a franchise guy among them. Then they hire Doug Peterson, and they draft Carson Wentz. And everything for Doug is fine as long as Carson is fine. So fine, in fact, that they win the Super Bowl without Carson Wentz. That's how good a job Doug does. The following year, they win a road playoff game with the same backup quarterback. But then once Carson Wentz goes bad, Doug Peterson loses his job. And so you can't look, I hear all the same scuttlebutt, and I talk to a lot of people, similar scuttlebutt to what you guys hear about why Doug was fired. Did he want to be able to pick his coaching staff? Did Jeffrey Lurie and Howie Roseman not like the coaching staff? All of that kind of stuff. The bottom line to me is the Eagles have made a decision that either they are going to get Carson Wentz fixed, or failing that, they are going to move on from him. Either way, Doug Peterson was not going to be the guy for them to continue working with whatever quarterback they decide they're going to go with. To me, this was a matter of it was either Wentz or Peterson. They chose Wentz, and they may not even stick with Wentz at this point, given how disgruntled he seems to be.
Yeah. What do you think, Mike? You bring in Sirianni with a whole new staff. Stoutland's gone. Schwartz is gone. Deuce Staley is gone.
Well, Stoutland's back.
Stoutland's back. Yeah.
Stoutland's back.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. There was a rumor. It was being reported that he was looking at a job at going back to Alabama, and it didn't happen. So he's still going to be there.
Okay. Either way, they brought a lot of young faces, new but young faces coming in. How do you see that affecting guys like Jason Kelce? Maybe with Stoutland back, maybe he stays where he might have retired. How do you see the whole turnaround here? Are we in for a rebuild? I think Jeffrey Lurie didn't use that word, but that's kind of where he was headed.
That's where they've got to be headed. Let's be honest. They were old in all the wrong places. Look, they won that Super Bowl following what was a sensible formula at the time, which was Carson Wentz is on his rookie contract. He's good enough to play for us right away. He's good enough to start for us right away. So we can spend money on veteran players to fill in around him. That only works so long before you start to have to draft talent and replenish talent on your roster with less expensive players. They have not done that. They have not drafted well enough to do that. So what do you have? You have them overpaying to keep guys who are already here. You have Howie Roseman talking about being too sentimental with keeping players who are already here, et cetera, et cetera. This to me is a rebuild. And the direction of it is yet to be determined because we don't know whether they're going to A, stick with Wentz, B, if they do stick with Wentz, be able to rehabilitate him. C, if they don't stick with Wentz, are they going with Jalen Hurts? Are they looking at somebody else? Going to be a lot of quarterback movement this offseason. Either way, no matter what direction they go, I think it's a fresh, clean start. It's going to take a little while here.
Well, Mike, speaking of the quarterbacks, something very interesting today. The Eagles had already hired an OC and a DC, and today they hired a quarterbacks coach. And you were the first guy that I saw to tweet about this Brian Johnson. What is his connection, and why might it mean trouble for Carson Wentz?
Well, Brian Johnson was the quarterbacks coach at Mississippi State and coached Dak Prescott there. He also played high school football for Jalen Hurts' father in Texas, and has known Jalen Hurts since Jalen was 4 years old. Yeah. Recruited him to Mississippi State. Now, it turned out Jalen decided to go to Alabama instead, and then, of course, transferred to Oklahoma later. But Brian Johnson and Jalen Hurts have known each other for a long time. And while I don't think that's you necessarily draw a direct line between Jalen Hurts to Brian Johnson, and that's why the Eagles hired him, because Johnson's a very well-regarded quarterbacks coach and has had a lot of success. He's now at Florida. It certainly, if I were Carson Wentz, that would pique my antennae. Let me put it that way.
Absolutely. Well, hey, Mike, we got to move over and talk Flyers, and we have to talk Jake Voracek. That whole situation, I don't think, Chet, unless you have it queued up to play it, I don't know we're going to play it. But
I'm not going to make him.
Do we have to?
No, I'm not going to do that to you, Mike.
Thank you.
But I have to ask you, Mike. Did it catch you off guard? And once you had a minute to think about it, do you know where it went back to and where this started? Because obviously Jake was kind of laying in the weeds waiting for a chance to do that, and he got it.
To answer your question, Bill, yeah, it surprised me a lot. I know exactly what it stems from. So a year ago, Halloween of 2019, I went to Voorhees to write a column about the Flyers. And on that day, in the locker room, Alain Vigneault is standing in the middle of the locker room. There's a group of writers around him, and the only two players in the locker room sitting at their lockers 5 feet away are Jake Voracek and James Van Riemsdyk. And Vigneault at the time is literally saying, I need more from Claude Giroux and Jake Voracek. As he's saying this, Voracek is looking in his direction and laughing. Okay? Now, the only voice in the room is Vigneault's. So I have an hour and a half ride home from Voorhees to my house in Bucks County. I have 65 people, literally 65 people coming to my house for a Halloween party / trick-or-treating in 45 minutes. So I have 45 minutes from the time I get home until the time all these people show up to write this column. So I crank it out, and I'm kind of sloppy with it. I'm a little too overt in tying Voracek's laughter directly to what Vigneault was saying. I made it really, really seem like he had heard what Vigneault had said and was laughing directly at it, which I did not know for certain. So when the column appeared online the next morning, I got a call from the Flyers PR guy, Zach Hill, and he said, "Hey, look, Jake is saying he wasn't laughing at what AV said. He didn't hear it. Could you address this in your column?" I said, "Zach, I'm looking at it." I called the column up. I said, "I'm looking at it right now. I will change this as soon as we hang up on the phone with each other. Within 5 minutes, this will be fixed." I said, "Please tell Jake, if he wants to talk to me about this, give him my phone number. If he sees me at practice or at a game, he can approach me. I'm happy to discuss this with him. Tell him I apologize." So I hung up with Zach. I fixed the column so that I left open the possibility that he wasn't laughing at what Alain Vigneault said. And to me, the issue was buried. I went to 15 Flyers games and practices between then and the beginning of the pandemic, saw Jake, never said a word to me. And then I asked him that question 2 weeks ago, and all hell broke loose.
Wow. Well, I think you guys should just go out and have a Wawa hoagie together, and
No chance, Chet. And that has nothing to do with Jake.
All right. Well, speaking of the Flyers, they are, I guess, 5-2-1, 4-2-1. I don't know. They're
4-2-1. Yeah.
4-2-1. Okay. Not bad, but they're giving up way too many shots and consequently too many goals. We saw Carter Hart abuse his goalie stick on Saturday. He's a little frustrated. I can't blame him. It's still early in the season, but are the defense and this young goalie a concern for you?
The goalie less so than the defense. Eric Gustafsson, who they brought in this offseason, is not a strong defensive defenseman. He's a weapon on the power play, but not much more than that. Ivan Provorov is a terrific young defenseman, and if they could keep him out there for 60 minutes, I'm sure Alain Vigneault would do that, but he can't. And they just have a hard time getting the puck out of their own zone. Even last night, that 5-3 win over the Devils, too many turnovers, really struggling to move the puck. They're going to have to I think they're going to have to add a veteran defenseman at some point this season to kind of settle everything down, because most of those guys are still pretty young, guys like Travis Sanheim and Robert Haig, but they've been around long enough that you would hope that they would have kind of come along a little bit farther at this point. So, yeah, to me, the defense is more concerned than Carter Hart. I think Hart will be fine.
Well, I guess the good point, Mike, is that they're struggling when you watch them, but the results haven't been so bad. So if they can stay in the top end, stay in the hunt, there's still a good chance they could be where they need to be in the end.
Yeah, they have. I mean, assuming that Lindblom and Nolan Patrick are back to close to the players you hope they would be before, Lindblom obviously went through his, had cancer and came back from it, and Nolan Patrick had his concussion-related migraines. They've both been very good so far this season. They have depth up front. I still would like to see them add another scorer, although James Van Riemsdyk has gotten off to a really hot start, and he can be that kind of player. He had 2 goals last night against the Devils, and he shows you what a scorer can do. You stand in front of the net, you get your stick on a couple of wrist shots, and boom, you've got a couple of, goals on the power play. So, I'm cautiously optimistic about the team they can be. I didn't think they played well in the playoffs last year at all. And I think they still probably need like 1, maybe 2 more tweaks to their roster before you can say, okay, this is really a team that's ready to compete for a Stanley Cup.
Well, the 76ers tweaked their roster quite a bit over the offseason, got a new head coach as well, some general manager, changes. They're 12-6, clinging to first place in the Eastern Conference. Big game tonight against the Lakers, LeBron and company. But they're 0-4 when Joel Embiid doesn't play. Bill may have something to say about that. And like last year, they're well below 500 on the road. What do you make of Doc Rivers' team so far?
Well, I think the additions that Daryl Morey made to the roster, the changes he made helped. Just by virtue of the nature of the sport now, you need outside shooters. And the fact that they now have, a guy like Danny Green, a guy like Seth Curry, the fact that Shake Milton's game has developed a little bit and he can be a force on the perimeter as well. But look, Chet, you said it. Like, Joel Embiid is a better player now than he was last year or the year before that. And some of this just comes down to the fact that in the NBA, I think we forget this, it's a veteran league. Guys don't peak until they are 29, 30, 31. That's when they hit their prime. Joel Embiid has been excellent for a lot of the time he's been with the Sixers. He's been disappointing at other times, but he's still a very young player. And so is Ben Simmons. And I would argue Simmons has been, a bit of a disappointment this season. But those guys are still young. They've got a ways to go. And, that was always, for instance, a couple of weeks ago when there was all this discussion about trading for James Harden, that was always my hesitation, was that, these guys, Embiid and Simmons, are still at a stage in their careers where they're just starting to tap into the players that they can be. Now, I want to see Ben Simmons shoot the ball more, obviously, like everybody else. Maybe he never does that. And, maybe it's worthwhile for the Sixers to move on from him and get somebody else who fits better with Embiid. But for right now, I think you got to be happy with where they're at.
Well, Mike, I'm not happy with Joel Embiid. So
here we go.
Well, I just had to say it. The guy doesn't play a game every week. How can you win with a guy who isn't going to show up every night to play, or whether it's load management, whatever the heck they call it? I don't know. All I know is they stink the nights he doesn't play. And, he's a top player in the league. He might be a top 3, 4, 5 guys in the league. But he can't come to work every night, and that just really troubles me.
Well, I think, Bill, some of it comes down to how you view a player's obligation and a team's obligation during a regular season versus the playoffs. Like, Embiid is not load managed. He didn't load manage in the playoffs last year, for instance, against the Celtics in the bubble. I mean, he was the one guy who showed up in that series. He was their best player by a lot. And you can make a case that his less than ideal conditioning hurt him in previous playoff stints, for instance, against the Raptors and things like that. But if they're going to get the Joel Embiid in the playoffs that they're getting from him this regular season, and he's there every night in the playoffs, I think they'll take that trade-off. Remember, Greg Popovich has done this in the past with Tim Duncan and Manu Ginobili and Tony Parker. The Raptors did it and won a championship with Kawhi Leonard. So it's not unprecedented. And I understand where you're coming from. There's a part of me too that expects a guy to play every night. But the flip side of that coin, and somebody who would know something about this is Daryl Morey, the GM. The flip side of that is you want to get as much out of Embiid as you can. And Morey has experience in Houston with a big man in Yao Ming whose feet let him down, who was as dominant a player as there was in the league, certainly as dominant a big man as there was in the league for about a 3 or 4 year stretch. And his career was cut short by injury. And you don't want to see the same thing with Embiid. And so it's a fine line to walk.
All right. Well, Mike, in addition to talking about the Voracek incident and the fact that you're just a great guest whenever we have you on, another reason we wanted to have you on this week is, as I mentioned, yesterday happened to be the 1 year anniversary of the tragic death of Kobe Bryant and 8 others in the helicopter crash, including his daughter. And you happen to be writing a book about the former Lower Merion basketball star. So I want to get an update from you on that and, have you tell us about the book. If I'm not mistaken, the title is Remember His Name, The Rise and Fall of Kobe Bryant. Tell us what readers can expect and when it'll be available.
Sure. Well, it's actually got a new title. It's called The Rise, Kobe Bryant and the Pursuit of Immortality. And the book is going to focus, the pitch line I have for the book is it's Batman Begins for the Black Mamba. If you've seen the movie Batman Begins, it deals exclusively with how Bruce Wayne became Batman. That's the theme, I guess, of this book. I'm going to deal with Kobe's young life, and in particular, his 4 years at Lower Merion. The state championship run, the district championship run, the lead up to his being drafted in 1996 by the Hornets and then traded to the Lakers. And it's going to focus on that like a laser beam on those early years of his life in Italy. There'll be a chapter in his life on Italy. And then there will be a lot on him as a person at Lower Merion, his identity, trying to fit into the culture of a suburban Philadelphia high school that was pretty diverse. And I think, to me, the thing that drew me to this story was when he died, there became this sense, and the sense had existed for a long time, I think, that he just kind of sprouted fully formed out of a hill in Los Angeles. Because he had been in LA and with the Lakers for so long, he kind of grew up before the entire country and the entire world's eyes. But he was 17 or 18 when he got out there. There was a lot of living that he had done and a lot that he had accomplished, and a lot of it very dramatic, while he was in the Philadelphia area and even before that. So that was the story I wanted to tell. It's a story that a lot of us in the Philadelphia area know pretty well, but I don't think the whole country does. And so that's what I'm focusing on. And it's scheduled to come out a year from now, January of 2022. I've been working on it for the better part of 7 or 8 months. And I've got another month and a half, 2 months to my manuscript deadline. So that's where we stand.
It's interesting, Mike, because I think a great point. I think a lot of people think these great players just happen to wake up and be great. They don't realize the amount of work that these guys do at their craft. They always said nobody worked any harder than Jerry Rice. Jerry Rice made it look easy out there, but no one would ever work out with him in the offseason because they couldn't. I think they lose sight of how much work goes into getting, like you said, you don't come out of a mountain in Los Angeles.
No, and the nature of the work too, Bill. Like one anecdote that I've uncovered in the book is that when Kobe was in high school, even as like a sophomore or a junior during the summertime, he had a friend that he would play pickup with. And while they were playing, he would have the friend rebound for him. And while the friend was rebounding for him, the friend would have to insult Kobe. He would yell at him, "You're soft. You don't have a city game. You can't hang in the hood with the real players," while Kobe was shooting. Now, picture that, like two guys on the court, one of them shooting, the other one yelling at him, yelling insults like that at him. But that's what Kobe, as even a 14 or 15-year-old, wanted from his friend to prepare him to become the best basketball player in the world. And, for a time there, he was that.
Wow. Hey, Mike, I want to ask you something else. You frequently on Facebook will, share some of your fan mail, as you like to put it, where, readers often don't hold back when they disagree with you. And does the televised Voracek criticism go to the top of that list, or might there still be some other, fan mail to top even that?
The Voracek thing has unleashed a fair bit of, as you put it, Chet, fan mail. Look, I do my very best to kind of take this in stride. There are a lot of writers, sports writers, and other kinds of journalists who deal with a lot worse stuff than I do. And Flyers fans, for whatever reason, seem to be particularly sensitive about these things. I don't get the same level of vitriol from Eagles fans or Phillies fans, Sixers fans, Big Five fans, anything like that. And there we can theorize as to why that is. But, it comes with the territory. You got to have a thick skin. You got to be able to take it. It would be different if I were hearing criticism like that from my peers or from the teams that I covered, if they had an issue with it. But I haven't. The teams in town know how I go about doing the job. My peers know how I do my job. And so if some Looney Tune on Twitter wants to, call me a name that I can't repeat here in good company, like I said, that comes with the territory, and such is life.
Hey, Mike, I have a question. One of our viewers put up here. Let me put it up there real quick. Back to Kobe. His time spent abroad in Italy with his father matured Kobe. There's been a lot of things said about Jelly Bean Bryant and his wife Pam and Kobe. Do you get to that in the book as well? That's an interesting topic because everyone knows Joe and Pam as well here in Philly.
Yeah, Joe and Pam have not spoken publicly to anyone since Kobe's death, and they did not speak to me for this book. I was able to get other family members and people, around them and close to them to speak. But that's a good point that those years in Italy really did shape Kobe in terms of, what he saw to learn the game, the fundamental nature of the sport in Europe and the way it's played, the appreciation for other cultures. It contributed in some ways to his kind of search for his identity in a lot of respects too, because he didn't have the customary childhood that a kid in Lower Merion or Ardmore or West Philly would have had. So it definitely shaped his perspective on interacting with other people, how he saw himself as a Black male student at Lower Merion in the mid-1990s. And the adjustments that he and his sisters, Sharia and Shea, had to make once they moved over here. They really weren't familiar with American culture at the time, or anything like that. So it definitely shaped him in a lot of influential ways.
Hey, Mike, I have two final quick questions for you. First of all, do Andy Reid and Patrick Mahomes win a second straight Super Bowl, or does that damn Tom Brady win a seventh?
I'm going with Andy and Patrick. Mahomes is incredible. He's the best quarterback in the NFL by a lot. We just kind of take it for granted now, it seems to me. And good on Andy for spotting that in the draft out of Texas Tech and moving up to get him, because he's going to be winning games and maybe more Super Bowls for a long time.
And speaking of moving up, you said today on Facebook that it's irrefutable that the Jeffersons TV theme song is the greatest TV sitcom theme song of all time. I'm thinking I'm a little older than you, so I'm going to go back to Green Acres and the Beverly Hillbillies.
Chet, fish don't fry in the kitchen. Beans don't burn on the grill. That's all I'm going to say.
It is a great song. It is.
It is. I can't help but dance to it every time I hear it. I love it.
I got you.
Well, hey, Mike, before we let you go, we want to be sure that we make a date with you. So when your book comes out, we can get you back on and we can talk all through that and promote that thing as it gets ready for the holidays.
I would love it, Bill. Thank you so much.
All right, Mike.
Thanks
for joining us. Thanks for answering all the questions. Appreciate it.
My pleasure, guys. Thanks.
Take care.
All
Bye.
right.